A cop officer punched a woman in the face. He was horrified to learn she was an FBI agent. The city was alive with noise, even though the sun had set hours ago. Cars honked impatiently on crowded streets, the glow of neon signs lit up shop fronts, and the chatter of people filled the air. It was a normal night for most, but for Officer Daniel, it was another shift where every moment carried the weight of responsibility. He had been a police officer for just under 5 years, and though he carried himself with confidence, those who knew him well often said he was quick to react. Sometimes he made decisions before fully thinking them through. Tonight would test him in ways he had never imagined. Daniel sat in his patrol car with the window slightly down, the sound of distant traffic drifting inside. The radio crackled with a new report. Dispatch informed him of a disturbance outside a small convenience store just a few blocks away. A suspected theft had been reported. The details were vague. A woman had been spotted arguing with another person near the entrance. It wasn't clear if she was the suspect or simply involved somehow, but Daniel, like always, treated every call with seriousness. He turned on his siren briefly, weaving through the late-night traffic until the store came into view. The neighborhood was not one of the safest in the city. Small groups of people lingered near street corners, and it was common for misunderstandings to spiral quickly into bigger conflicts. Daniel parked his car a little distance away and stepped out, adjusting his uniform. The cool night air brushed against his face, sharpening his focus. As he walked toward the store, his eyes locked on the scene unfolding near the doorway. A woman stood there, speaking firmly to a man who looked nervous. She was dressed casually: jeans, a dark jacket, and sneakers, and she carried herself with a certain confidence. Daniel could see her hands gesturing as if she was giving instructions or trying to calm the man down. The man, on the other hand, shifted uneasily, glancing around as if he wanted to escape. The sight immediately triggered Daniel's instincts. He assumed she was the aggressor, maybe even the suspect. In his mind, this was exactly how a thief might behave when confronted. He walked faster, his boots striking the pavement with a sense of authority. As he approached, he raised his voice. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his tone sharp. The woman turned toward him, her expression calm but serious. "Officer, I've got this under control," she said firmly. Her words didn't sit well with Daniel. In his experience, suspects often tried to redirect or confuse officers. He frowned, taking a step closer. "Step away from him," he ordered, pointing toward the man. The woman didn't move. She kept her eyes steady on him, almost as if she wasn't intimidated at all. "You're making a mistake," she replied. "Just let me handle this for a moment." Daniel felt irritation rising inside him. He didn't like being dismissed, especially in front of a crowd that was beginning to form nearby. A few people had stopped to watch, curious about the commotion. Every second that passed added more pressure. He felt as though he needed to assert control quickly before things spiraled. The man the woman had been speaking to took advantage of the distraction and slipped away into the darkness. Daniel barely noticed him leave, his focus was fixed on her. To him, her calmness felt like defiance. He assumed she was refusing to cooperate, and his training told him that hesitation could be dangerous. "Ma'am, I'm giving you a direct order," he said, his voice growing louder. "Step aside and show me some identification." The woman's jaw tightened slightly, but she remained composed. She looked him straight in the eyes. "Officer, please listen to me. This isn't what you think." To Daniel, her refusal to comply immediately only confirmed his suspicion. He stepped closer, his hand hovering near his belt as he prepared for resistance. The crowd around them whispered, their phones raised as they started recording. The pressure in his chest grew heavier. He felt that familiar rush of adrenaline, the same one he had experienced many times during tense encounters. The woman raised her hand slowly, not in fear but in an attempt to calm the situation. "I'm trying to help here," she said. "You don't need to escalate this." But Daniel wasn't hearing her words in the way she meant them. All he heard was someone refusing to follow instructions, challenging his authority in public. His mind replayed all the warnings from his training about dangerous situations that began with hesitation. He believed he was protecting himself and others by acting decisively. He took another step closer, his tone turning sharp. "Last chance. Show me your ID or step back." The woman's expression hardened. She seemed torn, as though revealing her identity right then would complicate things further. She stood her ground, her calmness only fueling his frustration. To Daniel, it was as if she was deliberately provoking him. The tension between them thickened, drawing the attention of more bystanders. The street was alive with murmurs, the bright lights of the store casting long shadows across the scene. Daniel's heart pounded. He had been in difficult encounters before, but something about this one made him feel trapped between pressure and pride. In his mind, he believed he had only two choices: assert control or risk losing it. He chose the former. He reached forward, his hand brushing against her arm as he tried to push her aside. The woman immediately resisted, pulling her arm back sharply. That simple act, her pulling away, felt to him like open defiance. Without thinking twice, his adrenaline took over, and he reacted the way his instincts told him. His fist clenched, and before he could stop himself, he struck her across the face. The sound of the impact echoed louder than he expected. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Phones were held higher now, capturing every moment. The woman staggered slightly, her eyes flashing with shock but not fear. She steadied herself, lifting her hand slowly to her cheek. Daniel's own breath caught in his throat. For the first time that night, doubt flickered in his mind. Something felt wrong, very wrong. The woman straightened, her gaze sharp and unwavering. She reached into her jacket with a deliberate, calm motion. The crowd grew silent, waiting to see what she would do. What she pulled out wasn't what Daniel expected. It wasn't a weapon. It was a badge, small, metallic, and unmistakable. She held it up firmly, her voice steady and commanding. "I am Special Agent Rebecca, FBI," she said, her words cutting through the stunned silence. Daniel froze, his blood turning cold. The weight of his action crashed down on him all at once. Around them, the crowd erupted in whispers, some people gasping louder than before. The bystanders who had been recording now realized they were witnessing something far more serious than a simple street argument. Daniel's heart sank as his eyes locked on the badge in her hand. He had not just struck a civilian. He had assaulted a federal agent. For a long second, the street felt frozen in silence. Daniel's mind raced faster than his heartbeat. The woman, no, the FBI agent, was standing right in front of him with calm, unshaken eyes despite the blow she had just taken. Her badge gleamed faintly under the harsh white light from the convenience store sign. Around them, the crowd murmured in disbelief. Phones stayed lifted, capturing every detail, every expression. Daniel's throat felt dry. His training had never prepared him for a moment like this. He had been taught to control suspects, to act quickly in uncertain situations, but this was different. The woman he had mistaken for an uncooperative civilian was not only innocent, she was a federal agent with authority far above his. And he had just struck her in front of witnesses. The agent, Rebecca, lowered her hand from her cheek slowly. She stood tall, her composure unshaken, though the redness on her face showed the impact of the punch. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. "Officer," she said firmly, "you have just made a serious mistake." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His instincts screamed at him to explain himself, but all he managed was a shaky breath. His body felt heavy, as though the weight of his actions pressed down on his shoulders. He took a step back without realizing it, almost retreating from the force of her presence. The crowd reacted before he could. A man shouted, "He hit an FBI agent." Someone else muttered loudly, "This is going viral." Daniel glanced around and saw a dozen phones aimed at him, their little red recording lights blinking like warnings. His stomach twisted. Not only had he struck a federal agent, but there was no hiding it, half the neighborhood had seen it happen. Rebecca lifted her badge higher so everyone could see. "I am Special Agent Rebecca Miller, FBI," she announced to the bystanders. Her tone was steady but commanding. "I was in the middle of an investigation when this officer intervened without knowing the facts." Gasps and whispers spread through the small crowd. The revelation shifted the energy in the air. Where moments earlier people had been curious or entertained by the confrontation, now they were stunned, unsure whether to pity Daniel or condemn him outright. Daniel tried to regain control of the situation, his voice faltering. I didn't know. You weren't showing ID, and you weren't complying with my orders." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly, though she kept her composure. "You didn't give me a chance to explain. You acted without listening." Her words struck harder than the crowd's murmurs. Deep down, Daniel knew she was right. He had jumped to conclusions. He had let his impatience and his pride take over. And now the consequences were unfolding faster than he could manage. At that moment, backup arrived. 2 other patrol officers rushed onto the scene, alerted by his earlier call. Their eyes darted between Daniel, Rebecca, and the crowd. Confusion flickered across their faces until Rebecca held up her badge again. "I'm an FBI agent," she repeated, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This officer just assaulted me during an active investigation." The younger of the 2 officers froze, unsure of how to react. The older one, a sergeant with more years on the force, quickly stepped forward. "Ma'am, we'll sort this out," he said respectfully, though his sharp glance at Daniel carried disappointment. Daniel felt as though the ground beneath him was slipping away. He wanted to explain himself, to say he had only been trying to protect the public, but he could tell from the looks around him that no explanation would erase what had happened. Rebecca, though stern, kept her professionalism. She didn't lash out or raise her voice. Instead, she pointed toward the alley where the nervous man she had been confronting had disappeared earlier. "The suspect is gone because of this interruption," she said. "I was in the process of questioning him when Officer Daniel interfered." The sergeant nodded grimly. "We'll call it in. We'll get units to search the area." But everyone knew the chance was slim. By now, the suspect was long gone, lost in the night. The disappointment in Rebecca's eyes wasn't only about being struck. It was about the lost opportunity, the mistake that had allowed a suspect to escape. She turned back to Daniel, who was still struggling to steady his breathing. "You let your assumptions control your actions," she said quietly enough for only him to hear. "That's dangerous for the people you serve, and for yourself." Her words hit deeper than the punch he had thrown. Daniel looked at her, seeing not just an agent but someone who embodied the kind of restraint and composure he had failed to show. He wanted to say something, anything that might fix the moment, but his mind was blank. The sergeant ordered Daniel to step aside. One of the other officers gently guided him toward the edge of the crowd. Though no handcuffs were placed on him, the gesture felt heavier than any restraint. The onlookers whispered louder, their phones still recording. Rebecca took a moment to address the crowd, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "This matter will be handled through the proper channels," she assured them. "Go home. The situation is under control." There was something about the calm authority in her tone that eased the tension. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse, though many kept their phones trained on Daniel as they left. He could feel their judgment in every glance, every hushed word. When most of the bystanders had gone, Rebecca turned back to him. She studied his face for a long moment before speaking again. "You need to think about why you wear that badge," she said softly, though her words carried weight. It's not about control. It's about responsibility. Daniel swallowed hard. The redness on her cheek was a painful reminder of what he had done. He had crossed a line he never imagined crossing. A silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken tension. Rebecca finally slipped her badge back into her jacket and stepped away, her posture straight and unshaken. "Internal Affairs will contact you," she said, her voice all business now. "You'll need to answer for tonight." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the night with the same composure she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. The sergeant gave Daniel a long, disappointed look before following her, leaving him standing alone near the store. The city noises returned, the hum of cars and distant laughter filling the air again, but for Daniel, everything felt quieter, heavier. His career, his reputation, and his own self-respect felt as though they were slipping through his fingers. He had thought he was in control when he stepped out of his car earlier. Now, he realized he had never been more out of control in his life. He stood there, replaying the moment over and over in his mind, the calm tone of her voice, the badge in her hand, the gasps of the crowd. No matter how many times he tried to rationalize it, the truth was simple. He had made a mistake, one that would follow him for a long time. And the worst part was, the night wasn't even close to being over. Daniel barely slept that night. He sat in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling as the hours passed, his mind replaying the scene over and over. The sharp sound of his fist making contact, the stunned silence of the crowd, the way Rebecca calmly pulled out her badge, it all looped endlessly in his thoughts. His hands trembled when he imagined the video clips now spreading across phones and social media. He could already hear the voices of his colleagues, his supervisors, even strangers who would never look at him the same way again. The morning light finally broke through his window, but it didn't bring comfort. He dragged himself out of bed, put on a fresh uniform, and stared at himself in the mirror. His reflection looked like a stranger, an officer who had crossed a line he had sworn never to cross. At the precinct, whispers traveled faster than footsteps. As soon as Daniel walked in, he could feel eyes following him. A few officers glanced away awkwardly, while others looked at him with pity. The news had spread, even before official reports were filed. Everyone knew. Sergeant Harris, the senior officer who had been at the scene, called Daniel into his office almost immediately. His expression was stern, the kind of look that carried disappointment more than anger. "Sit down," he said quietly. Daniel obeyed, his shoulders tense. "The FBI has already contacted the department," Harris began. His voice was steady, but there was no softness in it. "Agent Rebecca Miller filed an official statement last night. Internal Affairs will handle the investigation. Until further notice, you're suspended from active duty." The words landed heavily. Daniel had known it was coming, but hearing it aloud made his stomach twist. Suspension. It was the word every officer feared because it was the first step towards something worse: discipline, demotion, or even dismissal. He tried to speak. "Sarge, I thought she was resisting." "I didn't know." Harris held up his hand. "Daniel, stop. This isn't the time for excuses. You didn't just make a mistake, you assaulted a federal agent. Do you understand how serious this is?" Daniel lowered his gaze. Shame burned inside him. Harris leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You're a good officer most of the time, but you've got a temper. I've warned you before to slow down, to think before you act. Last night, you didn't listen. And now," he paused, his voice heavy. "Now your whole career is hanging by a thread." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel nodded faintly, unable to meet his sergeant's eyes. Later that afternoon, Daniel was called into a meeting with Internal Affairs. The room was plain, the kind that made people feel small: white walls, a long table, and two officers seated across from him with notepads ready. They introduced themselves formally, their expressions unreadable. "Officer Daniel," one of them began, "we're here to get your full account of what happened last night. We have video footage, we have witness statements, and we have Agent Miller's report. But we want to hear it from you." Daniel felt sweat forming on his forehead. His throat tightened as he tried to explain. He recounted the radio call, how he saw the woman and assumed she was the suspect, how she didn't comply with his orders, and how he felt the situation slipping out of control. His voice cracked when he admitted, "I overreacted. I let my emotions take over. I didn't know she was an agent." The officers wrote notes quietly. When he finished, one of them looked at him sharply. "Officer, do you understand why this is unacceptable?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes. I should have listened. I should have handled it differently." "Not just differently," the officer replied. "You're trained to de-escalate. You're trained to control yourself, even under pressure. Striking someone, especially without clear cause, is a failure of judgment. And the fact that the person you struck was a federal agent only makes this worse." The word stung, but Daniel didn't argue. He knew they were right. That evening, news of the incident spread further. Local channels picked it up, showing blurry clips recorded on phones. Headlines painted Daniel as the officer who had hit an FBI agent. Talk shows debated the story, and social media exploded with opinions. Some people condemned him immediately, while others questioned the lack of communication between local police and federal agents. But for Daniel, the noise didn't matter, the damage was already done. Meanwhile, Rebecca continued her work quietly. Unlike the chaos surrounding Daniel, she maintained her professionalism. She gave her testimony calmly, stating the facts without exaggeration. When asked about the incident in interviews, she never spoke with anger. Instead, she emphasized the importance of training and restraint. "What happened should serve as a lesson," she said in one interview. "We all wear a badge to serve and protect, but that requires patience and understanding, not just authority." Her composure only made Daniel feel smaller. She had every right to condemn him, yet she chose to remain calm and measured. That contrast haunted him. Days later, Daniel was summoned again, this time to a departmental review board. The room was filled with senior officers, their faces serious as they listened to the evidence. Rebecca was present too, seated with quiet dignity. Daniel avoided her gaze, unable to face her directly. One of the board members asked Rebecca to recount the event. She spoke clearly, describing how she had been conducting an investigation, how she tried to manage the suspect, and how Daniel's sudden intervention disrupted everything. Her words were sharp but not cruel. She ended by saying, "I don't want this to ruin Officer Daniel's life, but accountability is necessary. Actions like this damage trust not only between agencies but also between officers and the public." Her statement hit Daniel harder than any punishment. She wasn't out to destroy him, she wanted accountability, fairness, and change. He felt both grateful and ashamed. When it was his turn to speak, Daniel stood slowly. His voice trembled as he admitted his fault. "I acted without thinking. I let my frustration control me. I failed to listen, and because of that, I hurt someone who was doing her job. I take full responsibility." The board listened in silence. No one interrupted. After the meeting, Daniel stepped outside the precinct, the evening air cool against his skin. For the first time in days, Rebecca approached him directly. She looked at him steadily, her expression serious but not harsh. "You're lucky," she said softly. "Lucky this didn't end worse. You need to learn from this." Daniel swallowed hard. "I know. I'll never forget it." For a moment, they stood there in silence. Then Rebecca gave a small nod and walked away, leaving him with his thoughts. Daniel watched her disappear into the night, just as she had on that first evening. But this time, the weight on his chest felt heavier, because now he understood something he hadn't before. Authority wasn't about control, it was about restraint. And that was a lesson he had learned in the most painful way possible. That's the expanded part 3, 1300 words, written smoothly like a real-life story, with no headings and no violated content. Do you want me to continue and expand part 4? The investigation moved forward quickly. News outlets kept replaying the shaky cell phone videos from that night, showing the moment when Daniel raised his fist and the stunned silence that followed. Each time he saw those clips online or on television, he felt his chest tighten. He wanted to turn it off, to hide from the world, but the story was everywhere. It was no longer just about him and Rebecca, it had become a public debate about policing, responsibility, and the relationship between law enforcement agencies. Internal Affairs scheduled more interviews. Daniel was asked to recount the details again and again, each time under sharper questioning. They pressed him about his training, about whether he had followed procedure, about why he didn't de-escalate. Every answer he gave sounded weaker than the last. He knew the truth: he had acted on impulse, not training. And there was no way to hide that. In the meantime, the FBI was also conducting its own review. Rebecca was called in to provide details of her investigation and the events of that night. She described the suspect she had been questioning and how Daniel's sudden intervention had caused the man to escape. Though she remained professional, her disappointment was clear. She didn't exaggerate or dramatize, but her words carried weight. One day, Daniel was summoned to a formal hearing. The boardroom was filled with officials from the police department, internal affairs, and even representatives from the FBI. It was the most intimidating room he had ever stepped into. He sat stiffly at the long table, his hands clenched together, his uniform feeling heavier than ever. The hearing began with a review of the evidence. Witness statements were read aloud, videos were shown, and then Rebecca gave her testimony. She spoke in the same calm, steady voice she always used, never raising her tone, never letting emotion cloud her words. "Officer Daniel acted without giving me the chance to identify myself," she said. "He escalated the situation unnecessarily, which led to the suspect escaping. While I was struck, my greater concern is the lack of restraint shown. An officer's role is to protect, not to react out of frustration. This case shows the need for better training, communication, and accountability." Her words cut deeply into Daniel's heart. She wasn't attacking him personally, but her honesty made him confront the reality of his actions. She was right in every way. When it was his turn to speak, Daniel rose to his feet slowly. The room felt unbearably heavy, dozens of eyes watching his every move. He cleared his throat and spoke with as much honesty as he could. "I failed that night," he began. "I didn't listen. I didn't give her a chance to explain. I let my emotions take over when I should have been calm. I was wrong." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "I became an officer because I wanted to protect people, but in that moment, I hurt someone instead. I take full responsibility." The room remained quiet. No one clapped or spoke. The silence itself was judgment enough. After the hearing, the decision was not given immediately. Daniel was told to return home and wait. Those days were some of the longest of his life. Each hour felt like a punishment, his mind filled with endless what-ifs. What if he had just paused and asked one more question? What if he had trusted his training instead of his frustration? Meanwhile, outside the walls of the department, the city was talking. Community meetings were held where citizens voiced their concerns. Some demanded harsher punishment, while others called for better officer training programs. The video had touched a nerve. People were angry, not just at Daniel, but at the system that allowed moments like this to happen. Rebecca was invited to speak at one of those meetings. She stood before a room full of concerned citizens, reporters, and officials. Her voice remained steady as she explained what happened. But instead of focusing only on herself, she widened the conversation. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about trust. People trust officers to make the right decisions in difficult situations. When that trust is broken, it affects everyone. The answer isn't to create more division but to build better understanding, better training, and better accountability." Her words were powerful, and the room fell silent as she spoke. Many left that night with a deeper respect for her, not only as an agent but as someone who believed in fairness. Back in his apartment, Daniel saw the coverage of her speech. Watching her, he felt something shift inside him. She had every reason to hate him, to demand the harshest punishment, but she chose to use the moment to call for change, not revenge. He realized then that her strength wasn't just in her badge but in her character. Finally, the decision from the review board came. Daniel was summoned once more. He walked into the room with his head heavy, prepared for the worst. The board's spokesperson read the findings. Daniel was officially reprimanded for misconduct and suspended without pay for several months. In addition, he was required to undergo retraining, specifically in de-escalation and communication, before he would be allowed to return to duty. It wasn't dismissal, but it wasn't light either. His record would forever carry the mark of this incident. His career would never look the same. As the decision was announced, Daniel felt a mixture of relief and shame. Relief that he hadn't been fired outright, but shame because he knew he hadn't deserved mercy. He had been given a chance to learn, and it was now his responsibility to make the most of it. When the hearing ended, he saw Rebecca one last time in the hallway. She looked at him steadily, her expression serious but not unkind. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she finally said, "You've been given another chance. Don't waste it." Daniel nodded slowly. "I won't." She gave a brief nod in return and walked away. In the weeks that followed, Daniel attended the retraining sessions. At first, he saw them as punishment, but slowly he began to see them as an opportunity. He sat in classrooms where instructors talked about restraint, patience, and the importance of listening. He watched videos of encounters where officers managed to calm situations without force. Each lesson made him realize just how wrong he had been that night. During one session, the instructor said something that stayed with him: "Control isn't about power. It's about staying calm when everything around you feels out of control. The person who keeps their cool is the one truly in charge." Those words sank deep into Daniel's mind. He repeated them to himself over and over. The more he learned, the more he understood how dangerous his old habits had been. He thought back to every time he had acted quickly out of pride, every time he had spoken too sharply when patience would have served better. This incident had been building for a long time. It had only exploded that night because he had ignored all the smaller warnings. Rebecca continued her work at the FBI, and though their paths didn't cross again immediately, her presence lingered in Daniel's memory. He often wondered what she thought of him now. Did she believe he could truly change? Or had he lost her respect forever? Regardless of her opinion, he knew one thing: he didn't want to be remembered as the officer who failed. He wanted to rebuild, to prove that he could learn from his mistake. And as he sat through each long day of retraining, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: humility. It was painful, but it was also the first step toward becoming the kind of officer he should have been all along. After months of retraining, Daniel returned to the precinct with a new sense of awareness. He walked through the doors not with pride or confidence, but with caution and humility. His colleagues looked at him differently now, some with curiosity, some with respect for his willingness to learn, and some still with quiet judgment. He didn't mind. He understood that trust, once shaken, had to be rebuilt slowly, brick by brick. His first day back on duty was uneventful, almost painfully so. He patrolled the familiar streets, observing the neighborhoods he had once rushed through without thinking. Every interaction became an opportunity to apply what he had learned. When a small dispute broke out between neighbors, he paused, listened carefully, and spoke calmly, guiding both sides toward understanding. He resisted the urge to jump to conclusions, to assert authority, or to react in anger. Slowly, he felt the old tension in his chest ease. Daniel still remembered that night vividly. Every time he saw a woman speaking firmly, every time he approached a suspect, he remembered Rebecca and her calm composure, her measured words, and her clear demonstration of professionalism. She had been the mirror reflecting exactly what he had failed to be. That reflection stayed with him, guiding his actions, keeping his impulses in check. The city had also changed in response to the incident. The police department introduced new training programs focused on de-escalation and communication, workshops designed to teach officers how to handle tense situations without resorting to force. Daniel attended every session with attention, absorbing each lesson. He even volunteered to share his experience in some of the workshops, not as a cautionary tale for shame, but as a genuine lesson for others. Standing in front of younger officers, he would tell them honestly, one moment of impulsiveness can ruin a career, hurt someone, and change lives forever. Learn from my mistake before it happens to you. Outside the department, the public slowly began to notice changes. Community leaders mentioned improvements in policing tactics, and parents told stories of officers who handled disputes more calmly. Daniel knew he was only one small part of the bigger picture, but he felt proud that his actions and his willingness to change could influence others. Despite the improvements, Daniel never forgot Rebecca. He knew he owed her more than words could express. She had been professional, patient, and fair, even when he had acted wrongly. One afternoon, months after the incident, he learned she would be attending a cross-agency seminar on collaboration between local police and the FBI. Daniel arranged to attend as well, hoping for a chance to see her again and perhaps express his gratitude. The seminar was held in a large conference hall, filled with officers, agents, and trainers from multiple agencies. Daniel sat quietly near the back, listening to the speakers discuss case studies, coordination, and strategies for maintaining professionalism under stress. Then, Rebecca took the stage. Her presence commanded attention, but she didn't intimidate anyone. She spoke with clarity, telling stories of her work while emphasizing patience, communication, and responsibility. She didn't mention Daniel by name, but when she described a situation involving an officer's impulsive action and the lessons learned, Daniel felt the weight of her words like a gentle reminder. After her talk, there was a break, and Daniel saw her standing alone near a window. His heart pounded as he walked toward her, unsure if she would even acknowledge him. "Agent Miller," he began, his voice low but sincere. She turned, recognition flickering across her face. "Officer Daniel," she said, her tone neutral but not cold. "I wanted to. I need to say thank you," he continued. "Thank you for being professional, for showing patience, and for helping me understand my mistake. I've learned a lot, and I'm committed to being a better officer because of it." Rebecca studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can see that," she said. "You've taken responsibility, and that's more than many do. Just remember, learning is not enough, you have to keep practicing it every day." Daniel felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He knew he could never erase what had happened, but hearing her words felt like the first real step toward forgiveness and closure. Life returned to a more normal rhythm for Daniel, but with a difference. He no longer saw the streets as a battlefield or the people he encountered as potential threats. Instead, he saw opportunities to help, to guide, and to act with thoughtfulness. Every day was a reminder that authority came with responsibility, and that protecting people required more than force, it required patience, listening, and understanding. Months turned into a year, and Daniel's reputation slowly recovered. The suspension and retraining remained on his record, but colleagues and supervisors began to notice a change. He handled tense situations with calm, he spoke with clarity rather than anger, and he made a conscious effort to de-escalate before situations spiraled. His commitment to improvement became an example for other officers, and even some of the public who had once criticized him began to acknowledge his efforts. Rebecca continued her work at the FBI, occasionally crossing paths with Daniel at joint operations or seminars. Each time, she treated him professionally, with the same calm authority as before. Daniel found he could now meet her gaze without shame, only respect. He had learned from her example that being strong didn't mean being aggressive, it meant being composed, fair, and responsible. On quiet nights, Daniel would reflect on the incident the moment he raised his fist, the shock in the crowd, the calm authority of Rebecca's badge. He thought about the lessons he had learned, the pain he had caused, and the opportunities for growth that had emerged from one terrible mistake. He realized that while his actions had consequences, they also offered him a chance to become a better officer, a better colleague, and a better person. Eventually, Daniel became more than just a police officer, he became a mentor. Younger officers sought his advice, asking how to handle difficult situations. He would share his story honestly, without excuses, emphasizing the importance of patience, observation, and communication. He made sure to tell them that strength was not in fists or authority, but in restraint, understanding, and the courage to admit mistakes and learn from them. The city never forgot the story of the night he struck the FBI agent. It remained in the news archives, a cautionary tale, but for Daniel, it became a symbol of growth and change. He knew that mistakes could define a person only if they failed to learn from them. By confronting his errors, accepting responsibility, and committing to improvement, he had turned a moment of failure into a lifelong lesson. Years later, Daniel would sometimes meet Rebecca at professional gatherings. Each meeting was brief, professional, and respectful. Neither spoke much of the past incident unless asked, but the mutual respect between them was unmistakable. Daniel often thought about that night and how close he had come to losing everything. He understood now that accountability, humility, and learning from mistakes were far more valuable than pride or authority. And so, Daniel continued his work as a police officer with a renewed sense of purpose. He patrolled the streets with caution, observed with care, and acted with thoughtfulness. Every decision he made carried the weight of experience, every interaction reflected lessons learned, and every encounter reminded him that true strength was not in force, but in control, patience, and integrity. Through this journey, Daniel transformed not only as an officer but also as a person. He understood that mistakes, no matter how serious, could be the catalysts for growth if one faced them honestly and courageously. And though the memory of that night would always linger, it was no longer a source of shame alone, it was a guide, a lesson, and a reminder of the kind of officer he aspired to be.